They say once you go track, you never go back. But that's simply not true. Nobody has ever said that. Here are 10 examples of a stadium that not only got rid of its track, but fully converted into a football-specific stadium, whatever that form of football may be. Husky Stadium, Washington Huskies. A lot of smaller college football stadiums still have a track, of course, but back in the day it was completely normal for even the biggest of college stadiums to have one as well. It was only about a decade ago that Husky Stadium underwent a huge renovation that not only got rid of the track, but most of the stadium, as you can see. Which explains why the renovation cost about as much as a new stadium built from scratch. It was worth it though, because nowadays it's one of college football's best venues, in one of college football's most picturesque locations. It was picturesque with the track as well, obviously. Stade Velodrome, Olympique Marseille. Like all of the other stadiums in this video, this did once have a running track around the field, but as the name suggests, the stadium also had a bicycle track or velodrome. Cycling is just mechanically assisted running at the end of the day. By the 80s, people had started to realize that football is what attracts the spectators, and so it should be prioritized. Which meant that the running track was removed, the runners were told to jog on, the velodrome was also removed, and the cyclists were told to take a bike. It wasn't until much later, when the venue was given a major renovation, that it was transformed into the world-class stadium that you see today. They kept the name because tradition. Estadio Metropolitano, Atletico Madrid. This is currently one of the most highly regarded stadiums in the country, so it might come as a bit of a surprise to see what this place looked like just 6 or 7 years ago. The original stadium was built to host the World Athletics Championships. It didn't. So it just sat there for a couple of decades being all white elephanty in that. It was probably used in some political ads against whoever was in charge at the time. Fernando Sanchez, waste your hard-earned euro on this. Ooh, I turned Japanese there. I did not mean to. Anyway, Atletico Madrid came along and said, we can do something with this. And they certainly did do something with it. They've incorporated that pre-existing main stand perfectly into what is now a spectacular football stadium. One of my favorites in Europe. Kyle Field, Texas A&M Aggies. There are probably thousands of Kyle Fields out there. Some of them are mechanics, some of them are fry cooks, some of them are rabbis probably. But only one Kyle Field is a 100,000 plus capacity football stadium. It started out its life with a classic horseshoe layout, and for a long time it featured an elongated running track. Like most college stadiums, it slowly evolved over the years, piece by piece, and it was a renovation in the 90s where they got rid of the track. But even since then, the stadium has changed significantly. It now has one of the most impressive brick facades going round, and is probably one of the world's most intimidating stadiums for the visiting team. Etihad Stadium, Manchester City. This one was initially built for the Commonwealth Games back in 2002. After the Games, it desperately needed a permanent tenant to avoid becoming a white elephant. Manchester City, current Premier League champs, were the ones that stepped up to the plate, and there was obviously no chance they were going to keep the stadium the way it was. Thankfully, most of the original structure was designed to be dismantled, and that's what they did. They also lowered the field and new permanent stands were built. Nowadays, you wouldn't even know it wasn't purpose-built from scratch just by looking at it. Soldier Field, Chicago Bears and Chicago Fire. In its original form, Soldier Field was one of the more unusually shaped stadiums. The seating bowl was very elongated, even more so than Kyle Field. So if the Bears were going to stay, something had to be done. At first, they did the stadium equivalent of putting a band-aid on a stab wound, by building a stand about 2/3 of the way down the original field. It was never going to stay like that for too long. What they ultimately did is considered by some to be a travesty. They essentially built an entirely new stadium and plonked it onto the old one, keeping that neoclassical facade, leaving the place with one of the more unusual looks going round. At least they kept the name unchanged and haven't gone with something like Chevrolet Stadium at Soldier Field. I'm fairly sure that would violate the Geneva Convention. Darrell K. Royal Texas Memorial Stadium, Texas Longhorns. When you think of it, it's a bit odd that they've named themselves after something that was bred to be slaughtered and eaten. But I guess Longhorns do look kinda tough when they're not in burger form. This stadium shares a lot of similarities with Kyle Field. The state, for starters, the fact that it started out with a horseshoe layout, and that it was in the 90s when the track was removed. It too has evolved a lot since that happened. The most recent addition, the redevelopment of the south end zone, is quite spectacular. It also features an imposing red brick exterior. For a team called Texas, this stadium is pretty spot on. Virta Stadium, Virta Bremen. There are innumerable stadiums in Germany that have recently converted from a multi-purpose stadium to a football-specific one, so I just chose one of my favourites. You could easily be mistaken for thinking this stadium was built from scratch 5 or so years ago, but it was originally opened just after World War II, and it wasn't until 2011 that they demolished the curved stands behind each end and built new straight ones, whilst giving the stadium a new solar energy collecting exterior, as well as a complete refurbishment of the original remaining structure. Looks a lot better, and better for the planet. Center Park Stadium, Georgia State Panthers. This one is especially interesting because it has been converted twice. Originally it was built for the 1996 Olympics, with the intention of later converting it into a baseball stadium for the Atlanta Braves, hence the slightly funky design. But what wasn't foreseen was the fact that they only stayed for 20 odd years, and that Georgia State would purchase it and convert it into a football stadium, giving it one of the most bizarre histories of any stadium. Yes, it clearly still looks like a baseball stadium. The conversion seems a little makeshift, but you certainly can't call it boring. There is another stadium with a very similar thing going on, but it never had a track, so we had to exclude it. Accor Stadium, Bulldogs, Rabbitohs, Waratahs, etc. This stadium hosted the subsequent Olympics in 2000. Back then it was the largest stadium in the country with a capacity of 115,000. But these upper tiers at either end were dismantled after the games as planned. Since the most popular sport in Sydney is rugby league, it was always going to be the main sport this stadium was used for. But AFL and cricket are also a thing, and they are played on large oval fields. So instead of converting it into a traditional rectangular stadium, the lower tier is now movable, allowing it to cater to all sports, except for Egyptian goat wrestling, which as we all know requires a playing area made of sand. Like I said, these were just 10 examples of stadiums that got rid of their track. There are heaps more. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, have a good one.